So we're going to look at right now the next lesson, which is solving right triangles. Notice that what we're solving here are only right triangles, not other kinds of triangles, so they have to have a right angle. First thing that we can use is we can use the Pythagorean theorem to find the third side if we already know the other two sides. Okay. Second, we can use the theorem that we know says the sum of the degrees of the angles of a triangle is 180 degrees. So if I know two angles, I can subtract to find the third one. Okay. We also know that we can use our trig ratios to solve for the missing parts. Notice, let me go back to the objective here, that we're looking to solve a triangle, which means to find all of the missing sides and angles, anything we don't already have. So if I need to solve for parts that I can't use the Pythagorean theorem or the angle sum theorem to find, I may need to use my trig ratios instead. So our trig ratios, if you remember, are sine, cosine, and tangent. Those are our trig ratios. And remember that we have a nifty little mnemonic to remember that by. So, SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so don't forget that, SOHCAHTOA. That will get you really far. So these are the three ways, the three methods, the three things that we can use to help us solve a right triangle. Okay, and the combination of these, depending on what you are given to start with, put these together to find the parts that you need. Okay, and which parts you're going to need to find depends on what you have to begin with. So let's start with an example here. If I am given that angle C is 90 degrees, side A is 7, and side B is 10, I want to solve the triangle. So first, solve the triangle means to find all the other parts. I want to take a minute to just point out that angles are capital letters. So notice my angles are all capital letters. Angles are capitals. Okay. And that all of my sides are lowercase letters, A, B, and C, you'll notice here. Okay. So that just kind of helps us. It'll be more important when we get to some of our other formulas, but just keep that in mind. Your angles are capital letters and your sides are lowercase letters. So when they say A equals 7, right here in what you're given, notice that's a lowercase a, so we're talking about the side here. So the first thing we want to do is label our given values. I want to label this angle as 90 degrees, side A is 7, and side B is 10. That looks kind of like a 2, so let me make it more like a 7. There we go. All right. And so I want to find the other parts of my triangle. I need to find side C and angles A and B. Notice that's what's listed here on the right for us to find. So one of the things I can use, notice I have two sides and one angle to start with. So if I have two sides, I can use the Pythagorean theorem to find the third side. 7 squared plus 10 squared equals C squared. So remember, Pythagorean theorem is A squared plus B squared equals C squared, where you're using your two legs as A and B and your hypotenuse as C. So we do the math here. 49 plus 100 equals C squared. C squared equals 149. C equals the square root of 149. And you may remember that most of the time we ask you to simplify those square roots and leave us a simplified square root. However, when we are solving for triangles, we want you to write that as a decimal. I want to know what is approximately the length of C. So when you plug that into your calculator, the square root of 149, you're going to get approximately 12.2, and it's 12.206. So if you wanted to round it to two places, if you were asked to round it to two places, you would write to 12.21, okay? For right now, for this particular problem, for me personally, I'm going to let you just write that as 12.2. So the length of C, this hypotenuse, is approximately 12.2. But that's just one thing I need to solve. I also need to find angle A and angle B. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to use one of my other methods. Pythagorean theorem doesn't help me with the angles, And I have only one angle to start with, so my angle sum theorem is not going to give me both of my other angles. I would need at least one of them already. So instead, what I'm going to do is look at where, I'm just going to start with angle A, where angle A is right here. Now I'm going to look at what I have in relation to angle A because I'm going to need to use some trig functions. Now let me take a minute to talk to you about the sides that you choose to use. As much as possible, you should always use sides that have measures which are exact and not measures which you have rounded. So for example, in this case, I know that A is exactly 7 and B is exactly 10. Okay, and what I don't know is angle C. I know it's approximately 12.2, but I don't know what it is exactly, and so I don't want to use that rounded answer. Okay, I could use square root of 149 because I know that's exact, but I don't want to use 12.2 because if I use a rounded answer to find my next answer, chances are my rounding will be off a little bit. So instead, I really want to use 7 and 10. So I'm going to label these in relation to angle A. I have opposite and I have adjacent. And so the trig function I'm going to use here is going to be the one that uses opposite and adjacent, which in this case is always tangent. Tangent equals opposite over adjacent. Okay. If I would have, let's say I had my hypotenuse, maybe I had to use sine or cosine, depends on which side you're going to use. Make sure you know which is which. So the tangent of angle A is opposite, 7, over adjacent, 10. Now remember, if you know the tangent and you're solving for the angle, so think back to your other trig instruction, the other things you learned about trig. In order to find that angle A, I would do the inverse of the trig function. And so the inverse of the trig function, and I would take my calculator and plug in 7 over 10 into that inverse trig function, and it would tell me that A is 34.99, etc. Okay? And so I can round that and make it 35. It's so close, there's no point writing 0.992, okay? And so I can write that as 35 degrees. Take a note to just make sure that your calculator is in degrees. Okay. There are other modes on your calculator which will give you other values, but we want it to be degrees all the time when you're solving these triangles. Because you haven't learned the other modes yet. Eventually you will, but we're always going to be in degrees. So if you don't see that little DEG on your screen, make sure that you put it there. Okay, go into your mode or your settings and fix that. So if we get 35 for angle A, then the next thing we need to do is find angle B. So if I go back up and look at my picture, this angle here I just solved is 35 degrees. So if I look at my triangle, I have 90 over here for angle C. I have 35 for angle A. So now I can use 180 minus 90 minus 35. So I can take the triangle, subtract C, subtract A, and that gives me angle B. So when I do that math, I get 55 degrees for angle B. Okay. Another note for you to just double check your work. All of your angles, when you add them up in the end, should always add up to 180. So notice we rounded here. I rounded 34.99 to 35 for angle A. In the end, all of my angles should always add up to be 180. So make sure that when you're rounding, you double check your answers in the end and that you don't fall a degree short or have a degree too many. So just always double check those angles to make sure that they all add up to 180. And these are my answers. So if I'm asked to solve, I want to make sure I have all three of those listed. Putting a box around them is very nice and easy for your teachers to find. And that's how we solve for a triangle. Okay, solving all the parts. Notice these methods work only for right triangles. Your trig functions and the Pythagorean theorem only work for right triangles. And so that's what we are starting with here today.